Hi, my name is Nina Guitron. I am a level one in the Masters in Athletic Training program at North Central College. Um, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What is your name? Tell me a little bit about your focuses, your interests, how long you've been practicing.
Yeah, so my name is Mallory Jones. I am a counselor for mental health and student belonging at North Central. I am also the athletic liaison, which is a newer position. Basically, we are working with a lot of the athletic teams and just individual athletes. They tend to filter them towards me. I have a lot of background in mental performance, which does just include like the self-confidence, self-awareness, just life as an athlete because it can be a lot of pressure. And so I do a lot of workshops with teams and also individual meetings in addition to the counseling side as well. So it's all encompassing position at North Central, but it's really great.
Perfect. How long have you been working at North Central for?
So I actually just started in January, so very short time ago, but it's been great so far. I have experience in private practice as well. I've been doing that for a couple of years, and I work a lot with teens and young adults and do tend to see a lot of athletes in that front too.
Perfect, perfect. Well, thank you for sharing that. Um, Basically, what we're going to be talking about today, as you can imagine, is substance abuse, misuse, and mental health among college athletes. You seem to be like the perfect person to talk about this with. A little bit about why I chose to talk about this. I took a meta aspects class last semester in the program, and we basically talked about a bunch of different pathologies from pretty much every system in the body. And I thought it was super interesting. We began talking about how like drugs work their way through the body and the physiological aspect of it and how it affects different organs. And it kind of got me thinking about like, that's so interesting. Like I was an athlete, and unfortunately, I knew a couple people who like misuse substances. Like, why is that happening? How is that affecting their performance, etc. Um, do you have like experience with that? Like, who do you tend to typically see for stuff like that if you see it?
Yeah, so obviously, since I work with the athletic population, it kind of embodies all of those struggles and issues. So I do see athletes that may be struggling with substance misuse. Sometimes I see athletes that might be going through an injury, and that recovery might bring up some other underlying issues, or may kind of turn them towards whatever it may be, maladaptive type of coping skills. And so I definitely see it. And typically it's not something that they're coming in with like the presenting issue being that. Sometimes it's kind of uncovered as we dig through the layers of like, oh, this may be a piece of me that I'm using to try to cope with whatever else may be going on just in that athletic identity.
Right. So do you typically see it more when they come in for like injuries type of thing? Or I know you said that they don't usually just come in and start talking about that, but does it typically begin with an injury and then slowly progresses to it? Is that like a trend you see at all?
It's a trend that I have seen. I also think that sometimes just within the athletic population, like it's this awareness of they may not realize that it's affecting them until we kind of go through those habits and behaviors. And so it may not be injury related. I do just have seen that type of correlation before. But sometimes they're just coming in and saying like, yeah, this is like how I spent my weekend, or these are the things that I'm doing. And it's kind of calling attention like, okay, like how is that impacting you in other areas? So it shows up in different people. It doesn't have to be injury related, but I have seen that pattern before.
Gotcha. So in one of the articles that I had actually sent to you, there was a little excerpt of it that I kind of wanted to talk about here. So it says, unfortunately, college athletes who experience this emotional distress are less likely than their non-athlete peers to seek mental health support. In studies examining barriers to seeking professional mental health care, college athletes often cited self-stigma and concerns about stigma from others as critical barriers. And like my question with that was, with all the developments that have been like made in the last several years, like for example, awareness campaigns and even like pro athletes, like I know DeMar DeRozan has this big thing now, which is I think is great. Speaking up about their experiences, like what do you think still drives that stigma around mental health among athletes?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's great that we're starting to make these leaps and bounds towards making it more accessible or less stigmatized. And I also think that there's still a lot of work of just this awareness of like what those resources are, because I do feel like we're starting to move past that idea of like just the athlete mentality of like rub some dirt in it and get back out there. I do feel like we have this awareness of like, okay, something's up and I may need some extra support. I think the barrier comes of like, okay, what does that extra support look like? And a lot of times with the athletes that I see, sometimes they're not viewing like the mental performance sessions as like, oh, am I going to sit down here for an hour and talk about everything that I've ever gone through? When in reality, that mental performance stuff could be like, I'm popping into a practice for 20 minutes and being like, hey, I noticed this, or hey, like, what are some of the thoughts that you're having while you're out there on the field? Like, it can be these short and quick little, like, just helpful tips that can make the world a difference. And so I think it's just giving more information about what support looks like that may help destigmatize it, that it doesn't have to be traditional therapy, although helpful, it doesn't have to look like that.
Right. I think that's really cool. I feel like that's kind of the first time that I've heard about, like you stopping into practices or it being something smaller like that. At least I know, like from my experience as an athlete, I feel like I didn't even hear about things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, I was terrified to go in because I'm like, oh, I don't want to sit there for an hour and then them just like,
Yeah.
interrogate me about my life. I feel like that's
Mm-hmm.
super cool. In what ways do you kind of like or I don't want to say advocate for that, but like kind of put it out there? Is that something that you like, is there like flyers or like do they coaches? Are they aware of something like that?
Yeah, I think this has been an ongoing thing for me, obviously, since I'm so new. I feel like athletics in general is so connection and relationship based. And me even sharing that I was a former athlete, I was a collegiate athlete, sometimes that helps bridge that connection or just like helps with the trust in the relationship that could also destigmatize it. I take pride in being very transparent with my own struggles with mental health, mental performance, to further normalize it and allow people to be like, oh yeah, like I have dealt with that too. And so I think the advocacy part comes in as like with that self-disclosure to build that trust, but also just like making relationships with the coaches or the teams or just popping into an office or a practice and being like, hey, this is the face that you'll see if you come and talk to me. Because it can be intimidating to come to like a wellness center and really not know who you're going to see or what you're going to be doing. And so I feel like just as human beings, the more knowledge we have, the more comfortable we feel. And so I think that's a lot of the advocacy part, is just getting my face out there and allowing them to see the person behind the title.
Right. Kind of like going off of that, I'm sure you work with like most, if not all, sports. One of my questions was, is there like any sport that may be more at risk for like, I don't want to say mental health issues, but like team sports? Do you find it more in like individual sports like track, or I don't know. I feel like I was kind of curious about that. I feel like people don't really prepare you for when you're like not in athletics anymore and you're in a team sport, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think, I mean, overall, in my personal experience, I feel like there can be stronger ties to like maybe struggles with like body image with wrestling teams because they're constantly fluctuating in weight and having to be intentional about that. That can stem some mental health concerns. Maybe it's like a high pressure team because they did so well the previous year that the stigma of like, okay, this team needs to do well. And so that puts that pressure and just kind of amplifies maybe some of those underlying issues already. I think it just depends on how you look at it. Like maybe team sports may have more of that like interpersonal conflict that can cause issues because you're around the same people for so long and it can be hard to form relationships with everybody. And then on the other side, the individual maybe lacks that support in the individual sports because they don't have that connection with people and it's all falling on them is how it's perceived. And so that can also bring up different things. I don't necessarily think I've seen in my own eyes of like sports that might be more at risk. But I do think that there are some connections that can be drawn just based off the environments that they're in.
Gotcha. See, I've never thought about it that way. Another question that I kind of had too, I guess going along with that is like, do you find, I don't know, I think of like myself going in freshman year in college, it's super overwhelming. It's a super overwhelming process. And then senior year, obviously you get a little bit more comfortable. Like, is there like an age group that you tend to see more due to, like just the pressures of being an athlete and then, you're trying to fit in, all that stuff?
Yeah, I think the big phrase of just mental health is it always depends. It just depends on the environment. And so I think that at different ages or different years in the college experience, you're going to experience different stressors. So like you said, that first year you're coming in, it's a new level of play. You're adjusting to being a college student. There's probably a lot more riding on you if you have like scholarships. Like there's this initial pressure. And sometimes there's the added point of like you're a freshman or a first year, so you're not playing as much because you kind of work your way up. Whereas like you get further into your years and maybe your last year, a big issue that I've seen kind of over and over again that doesn't tend to be addressed is this like life after sports, because one day you wake up and your college season is done and you have all this structure and all of these things that you've been building and enjoying for the last 4 or 5 years that now is just over. And so that's its own just pool of stressors that can come along with that if we're not addressing it or taking care of it. And so you see it differently at different levels, just depending on where they're at in their career, what else is going on.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm referencing another part of the article. Same article as the one before. There was a part that said college athletes also report high levels of substance use. In studies with college athletes, 28 to 34% self-reported recent binge drinking. 22 to 28% reported using cannabis during the prior year, and between 1 to 4% reported using other illicit substances during the prior year, including cocaine, MDMA, unprescribed opioids, hallucinogens, and amphetamines. The NCAA found prevalence of substance use among college athletes 1 to 8% lower than their non-athlete peers. Substance use among college athletes may be particularly mitigated by drug testing protocols. However, off-season drug use among college athletes is approximately double than in-season consumption. College athletes also frequently participate in high-risk behaviors after using substances such as driving while intoxicated at rates similar to their non-athlete peers. So my question was, do you think college athletics helps reduce the likelihood of substance use or increase it? Because the article does mention that although athletes engage in substance use, the percentage is less than non-athlete students, but it doubles when it's in off season. I know it's kind of like a mouthful, but yeah, I thought that stat of it doubling during the off season was pretty interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think my mind initially goes to this structure that comes with being a collegiate athlete. And I know personally being or playing in college, like you had the rule of like there was like no drinking 24 hours before practice or 48 hours before a game, or these zero tolerance policies, like depending on school to school or team by team, like these rules are in place. And for people just who are athletes, we tend to heavily identify with our athletic identity. And so it's usually one of those big priorities of like, we really want to take care of that. And so it makes sense to me that there's less of the substance misuse during season. And then what comes with that off season is truly that lack of structure. And I think it ties into like that injury point that I was making earlier of like you're playing, and then all of a sudden you're out with injury and you lose all of your structure, all of your just like what makes you an athlete, or so it feels like. And so that lack of structure, now we have all this free time, maybe less of people telling us what we're supposed to be doing or what we're not supposed to be doing. And it's just this taste of freedom that a lot of athletes will go through these phases of like off season. There's not a lot of self-control because we just get a taste of it and then we're going. And so I think it makes sense that obviously outside a season, sometimes it is that like I've never been without structure. So what am I supposed to do with it? And it takes a lot sometimes to kind of figure out how to implement structure just within yourself and not with what the system or what our coaches are telling us.
Right. So I know you mentioned like, people kind of overlook the whole after college athletics and like, what do you do with yourself? Like what now type of thing.
Yeah.
What are ways or what are things that like you implement to kind of lessen the, I guess, anxiety of being out of athletics? Because that kind of just like ties in with what we just talked about. Like there's no structure now. Like, so now what comes of what is my life now?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a big topic, and I also think it's a topic that tends to be avoided because nobody wants to think about the day that they're not going to be able to play again or that it's not going to be a part of their life. And so a lot of the work that I try to do is, like I said earlier, athletes typically identify as athletes. That's one of their biggest identities. And so a lot of the work is finding other pieces of their identity that they value, because once that athletic identity is taken away, they want to have this solid foundation to fall back on of like, I'm a good friend, I have these hobbies, I am caring, I love to volunteer, like all of these things that kind of keep us afloat so that when one falls, we don't come crashing down. We fall back on a solid base. And so I think that is a lot of the work throughout the college career of like finding other pieces of you that you value, and then also finding the things that you enjoy about being an athlete and figuring out how you can apply that to a career or just your life after college. Because if we love the team dynamic, maybe I'm going into a job that I have that team dynamic where I'm surrounded by a group of people for support, or maybe I'm really much like a leader. And so I'm finding a leadership role that kind of embodies a lot of those same feelings. And so it doesn't have to be this sharp cutoff. We can find different ways to still get those feelings and still feel that purpose that we got with our athletic identity, just in a different way.
Right. Oh my gosh, I've never thought about that. I'm like, oh, I wish I had this when I was in college.
Yeah.
So the studies that I think I sent you were all kind of maybe before COVID. Do you have any knowledge on like maybe even like new stats that you've, encountered in terms, just because I feel like it's almost kind of hard to base everything off of something that's like even before COVID, like all that stuff. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you if you had any like new stats, any new information about numbers and stuff about substance abuse, mental health, all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I highly recommend for people to check out the NCAA website. They have a lot of research posted there, and they just released their 2022 to 2023 statistics. And so a lot of that, you see a lot of the same trends. And so it is still the athletic identities are less likely to misuse substances than non-athletic identities. And so that has stayed pretty consistently. One of the things that I saw did kind of skyrocket was the use of like vapes and e-cigarettes. That, and I think I have it here, it is, yeah, it went from 8.3% to 22.1%. And so it had a pretty big jump, and the rest of like substance use saw a pretty steady decrease over just like different like binge drinking, alcohol use, marijuana use, like all those things either stayed pretty steady or decreased. But that was the one thing that kind of stuck out to me of like, it's really increased a lot and could be having a huge impact on performance too.
Right. And do you think that's just because they're like easy to get and, it's not like a regular cigarette that's, you have to be outside type of thing? Do you think that's probably why that one's kind of skyrocketing a little bit?
I think so. I think obviously accessibility is a huge thing. And so because it's become more accessible, because it's kind of become more normalized too, that it's not like an abnormal thing to see someone using like a vape or e-cigarette just out and about, that I think it unfortunately like destigmatized it, so people are more willing to use it. And so I think that's a piece of it. And I also think that with vaping and e-cig use, there's the like addictive qualities, but there's also the behavior qualities of like, it's this constant, again, it's a coping skill. A lot of people use it as a coping skill, even though it's maladaptive or it could have negative impacts. It's hard to break those behaviors because we get something out of it. I usually just overarch like behaviors, we do them because we get something out of it. And so it's finding what that thing is and then trying to get that out of a more healthy alternative instead.
Right. So as like an athletic training student and future certified athletic trainer, what is like advice you could give me to like assist in removing the stigma around mental health, or like maybe even, I know people don't always show signs, but like signs of, okay, maybe this person needs to talk, or because I know it's not in my scope to like give, advice. Like I'd obviously have to, refer them out, but what are some things that you think I can kind of engage in to kind of help somebody get to that point to be like, okay, I think I'm going to go and talk to someone type of thing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think really like the athletes that I talk to, they love their athletic trainers. Like that is like, it's such an important relationship because you sometimes are with them in very low moments when we're talking about injury. And you're also there with them during really high moments when they're talking about the accomplishments that they've had or seen growth through injury. And so you are there for some pretty intense emotional, just like distress, or even just like this eustress of really positive. And so I think it is that you've already kind of established this relationship and trust as you continue to get to know people. And so it is just allowing that space of like, if you have that trust, people are going to talk to you. People are going to say like, hey, like this is something I'm noticing, or this is something I'm struggling with. And really that's where you come in to be able to advocate of like, well, we actually have this person you could talk to, or like, would you be comfortable with these things? And like giving them the knowledge. Again, athletes, it's all about that connection and relationship. And so if it's coming from somebody that they can trust and talk to, they're more likely to be able to seek that out, especially if you're offering to be that kind of helping, connecting hand of like, hey, let me reach out to this person for you and connect you all. And as far as signs go, I do think it's a lot of the common ones you see, like maybe some like isolation, withdrawal, maybe lower moods, maybe just like certain thoughts or things that they're saying that may come across as like really negative, or they're being impacted. That's kind of where the conversation starts of like, hey, like maybe that's where we talk to somebody about those things, or even just information gathering. There's nothing wrong with just hearing them out of where they're coming from and then making a decision about where you can steer them towards.
Right. That's awesome. That's really good advice, actually. I like to think that like, like you said, as athletic trainers, we're with them a lot of the time. I just, you always want to do the right thing. I feel like I'm one that's like, okay, I'll hear you out. I want to help you. But I also have to realize like I can't do everything. Like there's people like you out there that like, that's what you specialize in. And I need to like, kind of just like get them there so they can get the best help. Yeah, it's definitely a topic that I enjoy talking about, just because I feel like we've all kind of been there at one point.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad, and I'm like, it makes me so hopeful, because the things that you talked about like how you are approaching everything, especially with the athletes. I think that it's something that's needed to happen for like a really, really long time, but I'm like glad it's happening now, finally.
Me too.
I'm like, finally, yay, this is so good. But I just wanted to thank you for joining me and providing insight on this topic. I found it to be really informational. And like I said, it just makes me super hopeful for like the future athletes and just like college aged people in general. Everyone, the whole population makes me so hopeful, especially with like everything that's been going on in terms of COVID and all that stuff. I feel like that kind of, put people at a disadvantage. But again, I just wanted to thank you for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we could talk about this again sometime.
Sure.
I just wanted to thank you. This has been a blast, and I've learned a bunch.
You're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. It was great to be able to talk with you about it.
Of course. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.